The following podcast recounts events that transpired over 35 years ago, and the opinions expressed are in no way intended to be a reflection of current attitudes at SeaWorld Parks and Entertainment or Houghton, Mifflin, Harcourt. And now, on with the show. On episode 9 of LA's Own Marineland, we'll discuss the dark days that followed Harcourt Brace Jovanovich's purchase of Marineland, and we'll also give the inside story on one of the craziest nights in the park's 33-year history. So grab your popcorn, walk up the zigzag ramp past the oval fish tank, and make your way to the Killer Whale Coliseum to get a good seat before the show starts. But before you sit down, there's one warning. If you're listening to this podcast in the first 5 rows, you will get wet. You may get soaked.
Seven-tenths of our world is covered with water. In Los Angeles, there's a place that overlooks this vast frontier. A place of wilderness. A place of drama. Hold your breath. It's Marineland. Plummet into global oceans teeming with life. Go eye to glowing eye with predators of the deep. Venture into a realm as intriguing as outer space. All a touch closer at LA's Own Marineland.
On New Year's Eve 1986, a headline appeared in the Los Angeles Times. Marineland sold to the company that owns SeaWorld. But we're not becoming SeaWorld, Marineland spokesperson Lori Armstrong told the Times. We will remain as Marineland and continue under our current management. Interestingly, unlike previous changes in ownership, when Harcourt Brace Jovanovich took control of Marineland, the park was in the strongest position it had been in almost 20 years. There were even plans for building a hotel and a restaurant on the site. Linda Malik, Marineland's marketing director from 1979 to 87.
We were financially out of the red by, I want to say 85, 86, somewhere in there. We were actually doing quite well, and attendance was growing dramatically. And again, part of that was people were getting more exposed to a lot of the animals, wanted to get close to the animals, and it was a feature and a product that they really wanted to embrace. I guess you never feel when you're doing something that you really love that you're ever done with it. Mm-hmm. And you've ever, finished the job that you were doing. But we made such a dramatic change in what consumers saw when they heard about Marineland, when they came to the park, when they read about it, when they saw commercials on TV, when they saw billboards all over the city. I managed to work with a great team of people to do that, but was there more? Certainly.
Gail Lawley, marine mammal trainer from 1978 to 87.
We were actually doing quite well. Attendance was up, revenues were up. It was a good time for Marineland. And there was talk about putting some money, capital funding for, again, facilities is what was most in need.
Marineland's new owners reassured park officials that the only change would be improvements. But as the new year began, not everyone was sold. Ed Capel, Marineland's group sales manager from 1979 to 87.
We knew 2 weeks before the park sold. Our sources had advised us that it was in discussions, and so actually I left on vacation the day it was announced, and then when I got word that the park had sold, I packed a suit. I was going up to Idaho, and I was going to interview at this resort up in Idaho for a job, because I did not figure that they would continue to operate the park, even though they were saying they would.
2 weeks after Marineland was sold came one of the most bizarre incidents in the park's history. It happened courtesy of Dave Mulligan, Dave Berg, and a lot of alcohol. Here, Dave Mulligan, author of the book Mulligan's Wake, tells the tale.
That fateful night. Yeah, it was one of my buddies, Dave Christie. great guy, still around. He had offered to have a Dave dinner because in our big group of friends, there were like 25 or 30 guys, and we were all, we'd smoke a lot of pot, get in some trouble, and most of us were in athletics also. So we were just kind of a crazy, wild, outgoing bunch. And 5 of us happened to be named Dave. I mean, it's a pretty common name. So my buddy Dave said, hey, my mom has offered, and they're a pretty wealthy family. My mom has offered to cook up a big 5-course dinner, and we can all come over to her place. You got to wear a jacket and a tie, and it'll be, fancy and formal and fun, and we'll drink some wine and do whatever else. So we did it.
Where was the house?
That was in PV Estates, top of the hill, up there. But, it was really fun. And so when it ended, it was because it was a traditional family home dinner in the middle of Palos Verdes Estates. It was pretty early. So it was probably 9:30 or 10. And I said, hey, let's go. And we decided to go out, and we went down to Hennessy's, which was a normal haunt for us.
The Hennessy's in Redondo?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, and how old were you at this point, Dave? Sorry to cut you off.
Oh, no problem. I was 25 years old. We were at Hennessy's, and then something I'm not used to anymore because I live in Nevada. We heard the infamous last call for alcohol. So they're closing down, but I wasn't ready, especially. I mean, I really wanted to continue the night, so I rallied the boys, and I said, hey, let's do something from the old days. Let's go sneak into Marineland and have some fun. So it was a unanimous yes. So we went in a couple of cars, drove down, parked along the cliffs, found a little side road, and then hiked along the perimeter and then down along the cliff where it was facing the ocean, and that's where we jumped in. And I wanted to go in and at least pet the killer whales. That was the thing back then. Let's go in, sneak in, and get all the way to the killer whale tank, and we'll pet them. And I think at this point there were 6 of us. My brother came along, actually. And we split up, and with the plan, let's meet at the killer whale tank. You guys go your way, we'll go ours. So we all made it in. It probably took half an hour to get in there. And there we were in the tank, which is a small amphitheater. It's like stadium seating. Mm-hmm.
So at that point, was everybody willing to go and at least touch the whale, or were some people reticent?
Yeah, they were reticent. I mean, I went right down because I had done that before. I'd just gone down to pet him when I was a kid. But it just never really crossed my mind to go beyond that. So as soon as I went down there, a couple of them are like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And they were already kind of nervous about being in there, trespassing. So it was like, I'm out of here. So a couple of guys already left, another one. And then finally, when I decided to just get on Corky, I looked back, and then the other remaining Dave Berg, great guy I had not seen for years, he said, Mullo. Everybody called me Mullo. He couldn't believe I got on Corky, and I turned around, and Corky pulled away from the curb there. And I looked back at him and said, get on the other one, get on the other one. So he did. So he got on Orky, and they immediately just started going around and around the tank.
So how did you get on? Did you go down on the little trainer platform, or did you? Yeah,
that's exactly what it was. There was a little ladder going down where they would do the shows, where you'd see them out there with a fish, and they'd give the commands. So when we went down there, they were apparently sleeping on the other side of the tank, and then I put my hand under the water and snapped my fingers, because I remember that's what I'd done as a kid. So they knew that we were there, and they came over and just popped up a few seconds later with their mouths wide open, expecting the trainer to lob them a fish.
It's interesting to me that they were just so excited to have somebody in the water with them.
Yeah, and that's the way it felt too. It really felt like they welcomed company, and so there was never any aggression or anything like that. They would just kind of roll over, and you'd be on their belly and rub, and they'd go under. Then a couple of times, the only time it really was a little bit like, oh, holy shit, what are we doing? Was when they were gone. And I looked down, and you could see, because of the light above the tank, like a giant white patch go under, a few feet below. And it's like, wow, that's a giant killer whale just right under me right now. But and then they would just come up very slowly, nose first, and then flatten out, and we'd get on and stand on them and surf, and we're just laughing. for at least a half an hour in there. You jump off them and they come over and grab you, and you grab onto their fin and pull yourself back up on. But yeah, they really enjoyed the company, or they seemed to. That's what it seemed like to me.
Wow. So just for 25 minutes, you kind of jumped out of the water, jumped back in. What were you saying to your buddy Dave Berg? Because I can imagine two drunken buddies be like, what the hell are we doing? What's happening?
Yeah, well, he was he's a bit of more of a mellow guy than I am. But he did it, and he's a great surfer. So, I mean, he's a guy that loves the water and loves that kind of thing. But I think it was a little more foreign to him than it was to me. But he did it. I mean, he was in there the whole time and jumping off. And I mean, he loved it. We were laughing out loud, and that's how we got caught, basically.
Wow. So, yeah, so how did you get caught?
Well, there was a security guard, and funnily enough, he was with a gal, a younger gal, who it was her first night. She was in training. So he was making the rounds, and he heard what it sounded like, drunk guys laughing, which it turns out that's what it was. And so he came in, and he was just in total disbelief. He had his flashlight, and he pulled his gun out and was pointing his gun at me over the railing, looking down, saying, "Get off the whale, get off the whale." And I was like, "Okay, hey, don't shoot, man. I'm not going to hurt the whale. It's okay." So Dave he was right near the platform. So he stepped off of Orky or Corky, whichever one. We switched a couple times during the whole thing. He stepped off onto the platform, got up there, and immediately was handcuffed. He had come equipped with his cuffs just in case something happened, and it did. So he got handcuffed, and I was intercepted a couple times by one of the whales that, as it would go by, I'd go, "Look, it wants me to play." And he said, "Get off the whale," and just was in such a panic. So I got off the scene, got over to the platform, climbed up there, and to be honest with you, I just would have run away.
Yeah.
But he had a gun, and Dave, my buddy Dave, was already handcuffed, so I just had to say, "All right, go ahead."
Yeah, I've got some drunken idiots here who broke into the whale tank at Marineland.
And then it was just chaos. And he was on the radio with somebody, and they couldn't believe what they were hearing. And then it was police and paramedics. And from out there, you could see back towards looking inland at the peninsula, sirens and lights within like 5 or 6 minutes coming from both directions, because there was reports of men in the killer whale tank at Marineland, and nobody knew if they were dead or eaten or whatever. So it was chaos after that. And I'd been in trouble a bunch of times, and it was not going to be a big deal. I knew that it was what are they going to charge us with? Which actually turned out to be the case. It was just essentially trespassing. The cops hated us. They were so pissed about it for some reason, and were very hostile. That was that. So yeah, went to jail, and it's just, after a couple of hours, we're still fully clothed with my tie and everything and wool slacks. It started to really stink.
Oh.
Smelled like an old fish tank.
What do you tell the guys that you're in jail for? I broke into Marineland and rode the whale. They're like, "Yeah, but you're right."
Yeah, I was proud of it. And they were like, "Oh yeah, sure you did." It was one of those things. Still, sometimes still people don't believe it, but that's all right. It happened. And the story does really, it brings joy to people. So I can see it. I've told this story so many times. Somebody come over, "Hey, is it really you? Did you really do that?" But it really, for some reason, it really sparks the imagination. And a lot of people say, "Man, I never would have done it." And I usually tell them, if you would have been there and seen how they were, I think you might have gotten in there with me.
The two men would have faced felony charges if the whales had been hurt, but Marineland indicated that no harm was done. Sergeant Robert Reedy of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department said the men were released on their own written promises to appear, but no bail was imposed. You may have noticed this show has no advertising. Well, kind of like PBS, we're relying on our listeners to support our efforts to preserve Marineland's history through this podcast, which has taken countless hours to produce. There are two ways you can help. First, you can make a donation to the show through PayPal by clicking on the donate button on our website at marinelandpodcast.com. That's marinelandpodcast.com. Or you can take a deeper dive into Marineland's history by becoming a Patreon subscriber. At patreon.com/Marineland Podcast, you can listen to full interviews with 19 people closest to the park. You'll also get the Patreon exclusive episode, Making Marineland, where I share the backstory of how this podcast came to be. It's all just $5.99 a month. Get started at patreon.com/Marineland Podcast. Thanks for your support. Now back to the show. On January 12th, the Monday after the two Daves joyride, Harcourt Brace Jovanovich issued a memo saying the Killer Whale Stadium would be closed for construction on January 20th. The same day, a salesman with Bragg Crane Company in Long Beach, 15 miles south of Marineland, received a phone call from Bob Lewis of California Crane and Rigging Service in Chula Vista, California, near San Diego. He asked them to have a crane ready on January the 20th. The call was made on behalf of SeaWorld. The cranes were needed for Orky and Corky. A few key Marineland employees were told the whales were going to be moved to SeaWorld, but were given a stern warning by HBJ that if they said anything to anyone, they would be fired. Ed Capel.
And then they told John Corcoran, who, God rest his soul, we've lost John too. He was the GM, and they told him that we're closing the park on a Monday for routine maintenance. And he said, never in the history of this park have we closed the park for routine maintenance. He said, what's going on? And then he was told at that point in time that Orky and Corky would be taken and moved truck down to SeaWorld. And if he had said anything to anybody, they said, there'll be no severance for you at all. It was tough for John. I mean, he could, look at the handwriting on the wall, and he was really blunt. He said, if you take Orky and Corky, you're going to condemn this park to death. They are such a draw for Marineland. They said, we're going to do this fancy multi-species show with dolphins and pilot whales, and so it'll be just great. And he knew. Brad Andrews knew, you had to have certain key staff that knew that were helping, get things ready and knew what was going to happen. So Brad and John Corcoran obviously knew by then, and certain key members of Brad's staff would have had to know. There would have had to have been other trainers that, helped with the behaviors that they needed to get Orky and Corky to do to get them in the gurneys to be able to hoist them out.
On January 19th, Marineland announced that the entire park would be closed the next day. Elisa Mitchell was working the operator switchboard that connected the park's phones, both internal and external, on Tuesday, January 20th.
But I had been called in to do the operator role and found out when I got there that the park had been closed for the day and there wasn't much announcement about it. And so as where the operator's desk was kind of part of the executive offices, and park had been closed, and so of course there was a lot of calls coming in asking about why is the park closed. And the standard line I was told to say is we're doing some maintenance today. And so that was a bunch of the calls, but there was just a mood throughout the park, and eventually somebody told me what was going on, because there was a lot of people in and out, and what had occurred when Harcourt, Brace, and Jovanovich bought Marineland. There was a great deal of fear, of course, of what was going to happen. And no, it's fine. We're just expanding, and you're making you part of the SeaWorld family, and we're going to pump a bunch of money into the park, and we got you, kind of thing. So, but I don't think anybody really felt any reassurance with that. What I had found out while I was working there was they gave the trainers and mammal specialists one-day notice that they were coming in and moving Orky and Corky. So there was no prep. There was no time for people to connect and grieve. So the shock and the grief and the disbelief that was happening, and I'm managing the phones and having people say, "Why is the park closed?" And then of course, you're now telling a lie that we're just doing maintenance. And so seeing the people that worked with Orky and Corky and just kind of processing and just looking grief-stricken and, in disbelief that this was going on.
Tracy Belting from the Animal Care Department was briefed by HBJ staff on the changes that were to come.
But part of the story that was told that morning was that Orky and Corky were going to go that night. And that at first, the SeaWorld people were just going to be there, and the Marineland folks that knew the animals were going to be the ones that were preparing the animals to leave. But that's not what happened. I just remember them, all of a sudden we all had to leave. We weren't allowed to be there. And so all of the animal care team, a big chunk of us were dismissed. A few stayed, but a chunk of us were dismissed, and we went over to Point Vicente and watched them loading the whales from over there.
Nina Easton from the Los Angeles Times eloquently described what happened on January 20th in a wonderfully written retrospective called The Death of Marineland that was published later that August.
The afternoon was growing warm and hazy as 33-year-old Gail Lawley pulled on her wetsuit and jumped into a 640,000-gallon tank containing 2 killer whales. Marineland's new owner, Harcourt Brace Jovanovich, had ordered the famous whales shipped out that night, and Lawley wanted to spend a few final hours with them. After 4 years of training the whales, Lawley knew their personalities well, and now, as she swam with them, their agitation was so palpable she could almost feel it ripping like waves through the pool. When the night fell, floodlights were turned on and most of the water was drained from the tank to limit the whales' movement. A 200-foot crane moved in behind the 3 stories of spectator stands surrounding the tank and swung a boom across the stadium. Down in the tank, Orky turns his 14,000 pounds to the side and watched a huge stretcher drift out of the sky and into place next to him. With just a light tap on his head, Orky, who is generally gentle but capable of outbursts so violent that he once nearly killed a trainer, swam gracefully into its folds. I truly believe that as he watched, he realized what was going on. He knew what he had to do, and he did it, says Lawley. But Corky, his 8,000-pound mate, was frantic. The pair had been together in the same pool for nearly 18 years. Corky tried to throw her massive body into the stretcher along with Orky, but failed. As the crane lifted her mate hundreds of feet into the air, above the bleachers and into a tank aboard a flatbed truck, the sounds of her desperation filled the hollow tank. Orky responded with a cry Lawley had never heard before.
Michael Jett, General Services Manager from 1977 to 87. When did you hear about Orky and Corky being moved to SeaWorld?
I do remember being told about it late in the afternoon, and since I was an operations manager, but that allowed me to go throughout the park. So I was told about that the animals were being taken, 6 hours or so before the trucks were to come in at midnight or late at night. Honestly, what I did, even though we were told not to tell anybody about it, I called KNX Radio and told them about it, that Orky and Corky were getting taken in the middle of the night.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, that would have been a fireable offense if they found out that I did that. But at that point, to me, the writing was on the wall. If they're going to come and take the 2 main attractions from the park, and the main draw to the park, it's just a matter of time before it's going to be closed.
Did KNX follow up on that lead?
Not that I heard, either right then or even the next day. I didn't have a recording or anything, but I did talk to one of their personality people. They brought in a couple of big trucks, big cranes. I was out of the parking lot, kind of making sure that nobody was coming in. I didn't know how they would do it. I mean, I knew that technically, cranes are able to pick up that much weight. My thought and fear was they would start moving around and thrashing and things like that, which they didn't do. They were just still and docile. There were no issues whatsoever. But yeah, it was a sight, that's for sure. It didn't take very long, and it was just eerie after that. Having an empty tank, it was horrible.
Gail Lawley, a trainer at the park since 1978, was in the tank that night.
That night, I heard vocalizations from Orky I'd never heard before. It was really a bizarre scene. And then when the news broke, of course, there was some footage of them, driving down the freeway, the big trucks and whatever that they used to transport them down. It was not it could have been something good, but, it looked so suspicious. And, it looked so, covert. And why are you trying to do it this way? Mm-hmm. So I think it was something that was quite negative and didn't need to be, I guess is my point.
Wow. When the whales were being taken out of the tank, what was their general attitude about it?
But I mean, we'd had to do procedures before, and again, the facilities were so poor that to be able to if the animals didn't voluntarily cooperate in a procedure, you had to drain the water down all the way to there was a ledge. I don't know, maybe I remember how deep it was, maybe at 8 feet deep or 10 feet deep, that we would go stand on, and you could, restrain to the best of your ability a whale. It's not easy.
Yeah.
So it was basically that same sort of procedure. But it was stressful, obviously. They'd never been removed, put into a stretcher and actually completely removed from the pool. They were separated from one another, which was a big deal for them. It was, again, not only the whole closing of Marineland, but that particular event, I'd say, was extremely stressful for the animals. And of course, the people.
Yeah, and what kind of vocalizations did they make?
I mean, whales have a huge repertoire of vocalizations. There's been quite a bit of research done on them. There were some folks that were doing research on them actually at Marineland.
Yeah.
And there was just something different about that. And it was Orky that was vocalizing. And all the sounds were made from the blowhole. And it was eerie, I guess is the best way to describe it.
Yeah. Now, did you accompany them down on that trip down to San Diego?
Oh, God, no. They wouldn't let us have anything to do with them.
God.
No.
Ed Capel.
I heard the stress calls were gut-wrenching, that they were just horrific.
Nina Easton's piece for The Times continues.
By midnight, both whales had been loaded onto trucks, and a 20-vehicle caravan began its trek to SeaWorld in San Diego, one of 3 ocean parks owned by Harcourt, Brace, Jovanovich. For Harcourt, that long night of January 20th meant the end of a desperate search for breeding killer whales. For Marineland, it simply meant the end.
Jim Roop, director of live entertainment from 1980 to 84.
But I got to tell you too, we were all duped. We were all told one thing, and then something else happened. And so when I say it felt like a murder, I mean, it really, really felt like something was taken away from you in an instant, in a tragic way. That, I mean, it was theft, and so, yeah, I think you nailed it when you talk about the ending being like a crime story, because that's kind of the way it felt to a lot of us. Because, again, we were told one thing, everything was looking pretty good. We kind of smelled something weird, but we were all hopeful. that our suspicions weren't going to be realized, but here, we hear late one night that this operation is going on at Marineland, so it was just awful. It was just awful.
The next day, there was footage on the news of the caravan rolling down the 5 freeway with large trucks carrying Orky and Corky. News reports said that the whales were relocated to be part of SeaWorld's breeding program. The move had to be incredibly traumatizing for the 2 whales who hadn't left their tank since they were moved a few hundred feet from the lower deck pool in 1970. When they arrived, they were lowered into the Killer Whale Stadium at SeaWorld in San Diego. However, it wasn't the massive 5 million-gallon Shamu Stadium still under construction to be open that summer season. It was the smaller tank that at the time housed killer whales Candu and Kanau, and currently holds the park's dolphins and pilot whales. Orky and Corky's former tank at Marineland was a woeful 80 feet in diameter and 22 feet deep. Their new temporary home in San Diego had a show pool estimated at 135 feet long and 50 feet wide, with 3 holding pools, the largest being about 70 feet in diameter. For the time being, Orky and Corky were separated from the 2 female whales currently at the park. Jim Atram, SeaWorld's general curator, told the San Pedro news pilot that after their arrival, they, quote, look as good as they did at home. Their behavior seems to us perfectly normal. At this point, HBJ and the folks at SeaWorld weren't entirely clear with the public whether Orky and Corky's stay at SeaWorld was permanent. Atram told the San Pedro news pilot that returning the pair to Marineland was, quote, open-ended, but being that there's a 17-month gestation period, they wouldn't be back to the park anytime soon. After Orky and Corky were removed from Marineland, a dark cloud descended upon the park. It was still open, but without its star attractions. Marinelanders were heartbroken that the killer whales they knew and loved for 2 decades were now gone. HBJ's decision to move the whales with no public announcement, in the dead of night, created a tsunami of a backlash in the greater Los Angeles area. HBJ claimed that the midnight move was because the whale caravan took up more than 1 lane on the freeway, but given the rest of HBJ's behavior, it was hard for the public to give them the benefit of the doubt. The company also never mentioned why it had to be a secret.
And they had to do it in really dark in the middle of the night because of the highway patrol. That they didn't want anything happening during the day that would cause backups or traffic or issues. Yeah. So the highway patrol required that it all be done in the middle of the night. Of course, that turned into drama. Everybody made that into like it was some clandestine move, secreted away in the middle of the night, like it was a bit. And no, it was done because the highway patrol said, yeah, do that. So there wasn't any conspiracy theory around that or anything. It was just that was the rules. Then that was it. It was really weird to come back to work the next day because the pool had been refilled and it was just empty with a little, whirlpool in the center where the drain, kept the water moving. It was really weird to be there and not see the whales the next day.
HBJ officials told the public that the park would remain open and there would be a new show in the Killer Whale Coliseum with Bubbles and Bangles the pilot whales and some dolphins. It would be a return to the park's heyday of the 60s. Being that there was only 1 pilot whale at Marineland at the time, it's assumed that Bangles would have been brought from another SeaWorld park. That future seemed tenable to some of Marineland's employees who understood that Orky and Corky would fare better in the larger tank under construction at SeaWorld, and that the park could thrive with a new focus and SeaWorld's money.
But I think there were also pilot whales at SeaWorld, and so that's what they were going to do was move animals around and concentrate on pilot whales at Marineland, and then the orca was all going to be at SeaWorld. And SeaWorld was going to stay the big SeaWorld entertainment park, Shamu, and brand named animals, stuff like that. Whereas Marineland it was going to be a different experience. They said they didn't want one competing with the other. And so it would be a different type of place. But again, more birds, more horticulture, more rehab and research, things like that.
Now that sounds like a pleasant compromise idea. You know, you want to go see the big flashy whale shows and all that, then you go to SeaWorld. But if you want a more cultivated experience or whatever, you go to Marineland, which was, that almost sounds like it makes like that world works for me.
Yeah, it did to all of us. It was like, because Marineland, it's now such a magical place that we only remember the great parts. But it hadn't been well maintained. There had been owners in the past that did not put enough money into the place. It did need upgrades. It did need to be brought back to its glory days. And so we thought that's what was going to finally happen. Is that this grand old gem would kind of be reinvented in this new way. I was okay with that. I thought that sounded okay. Because we still thought Marineland was going to be kept open, and that the whales would we found out that morning that the whales were going to go to SeaWorld, and that Marineland was going to become more of kind of a botanical garden and conservation park, that the pilot whales would become kind of the biggest attraction, and that the orcas would go to SeaWorld. And that we would be less of a theme park and more of a conservation center. And so I was part of the animal care department when they were doing work with like the bird curators of SeaWorld were planning on different species of flamingos coming in, and different bird species were going to come in, and horticulture teams were coming up, and they were going to talk about the plantings and renovations they were going to do. So we really did, as of that morning, believe that was what was going to happen. But part of the story that was told that morning was that Orky and Corky were going to go that night, and that at first the SeaWorld people were just going to be there, and the Marineland folks that knew the animals were going to be the ones that were preparing the animals to leave. But that's not what happened. I just remember them, all of a sudden we all had to leave. We weren't allowed to be there. And so all of the animal care team, a big chunk of us were dismissed. A few stayed, but a chunk of us were dismissed, and we went over to Point Vicente and watched them loading the whales from over there.
Gail Lawley.
Well, you have to understand, as much as I loved Marineland, and I truly, truly loved Marineland, the facilities were not great. In fact, the killer whale pool in particular, it was terrible. It was a single pool, a round pool, no holding pools, nothing else but that, which was, not appropriate. So I think for all of us, having them go to a better facility with better, bigger spaces and other whales, whatever, that was fine. I think that anybody who truly cared about the animals saw that as being a good thing for them. But it's just that everything was handled so, this whole secrecy and kind of making us feel like we were second-class citizens, and they used us as much as they needed to use us, and other than that, they wanted us out of the way.
Ed Capel.
Well, they tried to put a positive spin on it, and I knew different. I think that the employees were hoping for the best, but I think management, obviously John Corcoran, I think we clearly understood what was going to happen.
On January 26th, the Rancho Palos Verdes City Council met to pass an ordinance that said if HBJ closes the park, it would have to tear down any abandoned buildings within 2 years and provide a plan for the redevelopment of the land within 30 days. 2 days after the actions by the city, William Jovanovich sent a telex to Marineland officials that the park would be closed in 5 weeks on March 1st. The devastating news was accompanied by a very shaky defense that never held up with Marineland's employees or the general public. HBJ's new claim was that Orky and Corky were in danger at Marineland, and to build a tank equivalent to the 5 million-gallon oceanarium currently under construction at SeaWorld in San Diego would cost $17.5 million. Dr. Jay Sweeney, Marineland's veterinarian, was troubled by the accusations that the whales weren't safe. We take grave offense at the implication that animal health is anything but sterling at this park. The killer whales have never been in danger. They've been at this park for 18 years. HBJ also claimed that another $8 million in improvements were needed to just break even. After the improvements, the park would need to see an increase in attendance by about 200,000 people a year. No sane company would spend that kind of money with hopes of breaking even, Jovanovich said. If this had been a normal transaction that wasn't rushed by the park's previous owners, we would have had a lot more information about the park. HBJ claimed they weren't allowed to visit the park to get a real assessment of its condition in time for the previous owner's deadline to consummate the sale by the end of 1986 for tax reasons. There's no way we can gain over 1 million paying attendants without killer whales, said the company that had just removed Marineland's killer whales. This is where it becomes impossible to believe HBJ's alibi. Why would they make such a massive purchase of a 33-year-old marine park, sight unseen? We find it difficult to believe that someone would plunk down $23.4 million for a park and not have a sense of what kind of problem they would be facing. That's a little difficult to swallow, Rancho Palos Verdes Councilman Doug Hincliffe told the San Pedro News Pilot. HBJ first said that nothing would change besides improvements. Then it said the whales were taken from the park for an undisclosed amount of time to augment SeaWorld's breeding program. Finally, they switched narratives again, saying that the 640,000-gallon killer whale tank was in desperate need of repair, and the orcas' lives were in danger. SeaWorld's marine biologists thought it necessary to move the 2 whales immediately to assure their ongoing safety and well-being, the company said in a prepared statement. Tracy Belting.
I don't know. Me personally, I think it was a bait and switch. I think they had to say what they needed to say in order to get the transition happening, with both people at Marineland and the city of Rancho Palos Verdes and all that stuff. They probably had to do things in a certain way. But no, the way it went down, I was young. I wasn't really involved at that level of decisions, but it felt like that they had no intention of actually keeping. And I don't think it was even the SeaWorld people. The SeaWorld animal care people, they were just as duped as all of us. They were following the same orders that all of us were. So I don't even think it was SeaWorld. I think it was the owners of SeaWorld, the Harcourt, Brace, and Jovanovich, and Marineland was owned by some Hong Kong-based conglomerate. So I think those dealings were happening at that level, and so they were, I think it was all just being done as a business deal. And I think that the actual animals and staff were just collateral damage to what was a bigger business deal.
Michael Jett.
Did you buy any of the HBJ rhetoric that they bought the park sight unseen and that when they really did a close examination, they thought it would take too much money and the whales were in danger? Did you buy any of that, or was it just completely a bunch of hokum to steal the whales and then get rid of the park?
Complete BS to get rid of the park. Complete BS. We knew that there was a moratorium for getting whales out of the ocean. And with Orky and Corky being the only breeding killer whales in captivity, we knew what they were after. And we knew that was the main draw for Marineland, so why would they keep it open? So yeah, I didn't believe it for a moment. And most of my colleagues didn't believe it either.
Sadly, the park's end was near, but the end was much sooner than anyone could anticipate. On the next episode of LA's Own Marineland, we'll discuss the outrage that HBJ's abrupt closure of Marineland had on the local community, including the park's 300-plus employees. But before you exit the gates, be sure to get your hand stamped one last time so you can come back through the turnstile without having to buy another ticket. LA's Own Marineland was written, produced, and hosted by Todd Perry. That's me. But this wouldn't be possible without the help of a wonderful group of Marinelanders who shared their incredible stories. This episode features the voice talents of Rebecca Black. For more information, references, and to support the show, visit marinelandpodcast.com and follow us on Twitter at MarinelandLAPod. Please be sure to sign up for our Patreon page, where you can learn even more about the history of Marineland by listening to full interviews with 19 people closest to the park. You'll also get the Patreon-exclusive episode, Making Marineland, that tells the backstory of how this podcast came to be. Get over 15 hours of fun for just $5.99 a month. Get started at patreon.com/marinelandpodcast. That's patreon.com/Marineland Podcast.